Thank you for being here today. My name is Dave Pillis. I'm the director of CEERES, the Center for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies. It is my great honor today to introduce Tomáš Sedláček for today's lecture, which is entitled The Living Philosophy of Václav Havel, an Antidote to the Chaos of Our Time, which we all certainly need. Mr. Sedláček is a Czech University lecturer, chief macroeconomics strategist, and author. He's currently the director of the Václav Havel Library in Prague, and his role as an economic advisor to the former Czech Republic President Václav Havel gave him an essential grounding in globalization and economic strategies. Later, from 2003 to 6, he served as a non-political economic advisor to the Minister of Finance and as Deputy Prime Minister of the Czech Republic. For 16 years, he was the chief macroeconomic strategist at the largest Czech bank and had been a longstanding member of the Czech Economic Council. Mr. Sedláček regularly writes newspaper columns for major economic newspapers, and is also the author of The Economics of Good and Evil, a bestseller in the Czech Republic that has been translated into 22 languages and received several international awards. He was a member of the Program Council for New Economic Thinking of World Economic Forum that meets in Davos, and a member of the advisory body to European Commission President Barroso. He lectures at Metropolitan University Prague and is a member of the boards of many nonprofit and charitable organizations. His name was included in the top 100 global thinkers, top 100 thought leaders GDI, along with Milan Kundera, who was the only other living Czech at that time to obtain that honor. The Q&A today will be moderated by Irina Chekova, who teaches Spanish and Czech at the University of Chicago. Irina is a tremendous booster of Czech language and culture at our university and beyond. Among her other commitments, she is a member of the Prague Committee of Sister Cities International and a member and a teacher of Czech language, literature, and history to bilingual children at the historic Kazarv Czech School in Cicero. I would like to thank those who made today's event possible. Today's event is co-sponsored by the Department of Slavic Languages and Literatures, with support from the Consulate General of the Czech Republic in Chicago and the Otto Čapek Fund. And I would like to thank our colleagues from the Czech Consulate. Jakub Utyšený is the Consul General Czech Republic and Greeks here as well. So without further ado, welcome to Mr. Sedláček.
Lady, do you want?
So it's I suppose a very, very pleasure to be able to speak on American soil about the thinking of Václav Havel, whose 90th birthday will be celebrating. The word with us will be celebrating this year. Havel is something that's quite rare. Few countries have two philosophers at their house. This is something that Plato talked about with, some controversy, but the idea of philosopher king is something that enticed us, and few countries have been gifted with one. In fact, go through the history of the United States of America, you'll find personalities like Jefferson, I suppose, but Greek or even how many Italian leaders were philosophers, is rare. And in Czech Republic, we had two. We had Tomáš Sedláček and Václav Havel. So that's one thing that makes this, its size nation quite unique. Is we tend to be, if we are to judge by these two occurrences, we sit a little bit more philosophically laden than the rest of the world, at least judging by those presidents that founded us. And these were no ordinary presidents. Those were, in both cases, public presidents who established the country, liberators, and also heroes in many other areas except for politics. So both Havel and Masaryk would be great, even if, they wouldn't be politicians. So the unique thing about Havel is also that he managed, despite his very controversial philosophy that I will talk about a little bit soon, he managed to be a uniting link between Europe and America. This is quite relevant for us today, that Václav Havel is one of the few persons that you will find respected on both of these continents. And what is further interesting is that Havel has to manage somehow claim the bipartisan support. He had friends, both Democrat and House Republican. So it's something that I think is missing today between the American and European link. This Atlantic is disappearing, and I think people such as Havel and Mark Kearney should be the ones who take care that during time of political disarray and dismay, let's say, at least we intellectuals hold together and don't think of each other as being idiots across the Atlantic. So this is my attempt to just weight it up a little bit. But some about that thoughts to take about my that are applicable to the whole world. He's very often read as someone who is critical for feminism, which is of course true, but just like George Orwell wouldn't be well read if it would be only read as a critique of colonialism or as a critique of any totalitarian system. In the same fashion, it is extremely refreshing to read Havel these days, especially Letter to Usak, which was written exactly 21 years ago. You could basically take that and resend it today to your president, that you wouldn't have to really care much. So he studies this idea of spirit. Havel is one of the few people that actually devote a lot of time and energy to studying of a subject that is not much studied in academic circles, and that is the idea of a spirit. Now, I don't mean anything goofy. I mean the spirit in the German word Geist, or Gist, or Geister maybe in English. It's a source of everything. And Havel talks about the spirit of a nation. So if you want to quench the spirit of a nation, what do you do if you are a superpower and you want to subdue the neighboring country? How do you do it exactly ideologically? Of course, so the well way is to put tanks, as we see Putin's approach to Ukraine. But even 50 years ago, Havel writes that every industry, every field, book writing, microphone production, shares, I don't know, university organization, every field of human endeavor has an elite. It's a natural. YouTubers have their elites. There are certain branches of people that others in the given field about. Those could be chefs, those could be I don't know, marathon runners, and they're very often unofficial. They just somehow gain fame. That these people who are, let's say, the spirit of the industry are rare, very often wrong. They make mistakes. They're rebellious guys. They're hard to employ, unpredictable, just like a gazer, just like a ghost or spirit in New Testament. We read that the spirit is like the wind. You never know where it comes from, nor where it goeth, but you can see how it disturbs the least. But you cannot see the spirit directly, so to speak. You cannot see the living. You cannot see gravity. You can see the effects of gravity, but you cannot see gravity itself. And so in every area there are the crazy tricksters, to people led by the spirit, by the voices. Let's say we can go all the way to Abraham, who also responds to a voice. That's exactly what happens. Physically speaking, he hears a voice and he follows it, and the rest is history. So Havel goes back into this. He said that every body of ours has few molecules, maybe one or two. You know that your body is composed of 3 times 10 years of Google searches. That's how many molecules your body has, and your spirit is in control with it. All of them. They all fulfill their task. One of them are blood cells. Part of the molecules are bone structure. You don't even know how much you know. They are somehow self-managing itself. But there are few molecules in our being as if responsible for meaning. Doesn't have to be much. It's a small little percentage. Just like in any other field, there are people who are asking about the meaning of mics, and maybe they come up with crazy ideas, and some of them work. So if you want to subdue a nation, what you do is you chop off. And this is also beautifully. This is very Havelian. Not only does it work in the macro sphere of a country, when it is under a spiritual attack, what happens is that you chop off few millimeters. We need inches. What do you have? And under inches, nails. Something, yeah. You take a millimeter off. You take a millimeter of your spirit. You take a millimeter of your personality. You ban one, and now I'm quoting, you ban one magazine that nobody reads anyway. You ban one AAA that is only for a small group of people, And that is enough to chop off the head, so to speak, of that given industry, or even worse, a country, and just leave that country be for 2-3 years, and it will boil in its own stew. No need to occupy such country with tanks. In fact, and there's also no need to install your new ideology, which is new. We always thought that one ideology has to replace another that we need to have. It's all my fault. There's nothing. No. And this also works within a person. Havel writes very interestingly in letters to Olga how he himself compromised a little bit, just a little millimeter. I give up on my spirit, and he kind of requested to be pardoned. He kind of knew he's not supposed to do it. His spirit, his voice was telling him that this is schmoozy. I don't know the word to use today, but he also said, this all the prisoners did it. It was a regular thing. Every May you wrote a request to be released. They said also did it because if there would be another foreign Safen, for example, your president requesting to free political prisoners, then the procedure is, and they apply a request, and that request is met with a positive answer. So that's the procedure. They can't just pardon you without you requesting it. So he did it. He wrote a request for pardon, and then things took its own turn, and he was released from the prison as a broken man, because the whole country interpreted it as, oh yeah, well, he must have signed something. He must have given up a little bit of compromise towards the communist regime. In other words, the whole Havel gained freedom, but the whole nation lost a leading figure, lost a spiritual figure, so to speak. Pearl, extremely useful when one looks at countries such as Georgia, when one looks at countries such as Ukraine, Belarus, Czech Republic under the attack as we speak. And it is only up to you to see the dimming of the spirit happening right in front of your eyes. And the dimming happens most usually with the dimming of the crisis. If I was to summarize the European spirit that is now unfortunately bifurcating itself from the American spirit in the last half year, very dramatically, visibly so, even to people who are devoting their whole lives in studying international relations, then I would say what makes European spirit different from the American spirit is the law of self-criticism. So see through that you guys have your archetype would be Captain America, very black and white. He has the American flag on this shield, and he's ready to be trigger happy with anybody who doubts the primacy of American love. We Europeans, if I was to use a simile, would be rather a nation of us. And as already so Mr. We're not easily aroused by national, counting. We are right only by accident, and if we are right, then we don't say what that we are, because that's appropriate. So it's not to say that one needs to be worried for America, but it is to say that the European and American spirits are now distinguishable from each other, which a year ago was still not the case. In fact, when Emmanuel Barroso asked me and 17 other intellectuals to write the European narrative, he tasked us 15 years ago, write me the story of Europe minus the economics, minus European integration, minus zero, minus bringing of the barriers, trade and industry, and we failed miserably. We didn't come up with anything. At the end of the day, the poor freedoms that we had in the European Union, which is the freedom of movement of goods, capital, human beings, and services, are basic economic freedoms. So it's not philosophical freedom per se. Even the movement of persons, basically, the labor force and students. Hello. And so, what is the philosophy of Václav Havel? Let's go through it. This has become somewhat of a controversy among Czech philosophers, which means that it's a military. I always, when I do a lecture, I try to find the Goldilocks zone between somebody throwing things at me and falling asleep on me. That's my favorite bone between the two. If I were to choose from somebody falling asleep on me or someone throwing a thing at me, I'd rather go on someone throw a thing at me. That would be a better conclusion that somebody falling asleep. So I hope I'll succeed today, even though there's slightly raining upstairs and I always inductive to sleep. So I hope the subject will prove to be of such importance that you'll start throwing things at me. So let me just now do the way that I read Václav Havel as an economist who is trained to have a structured mind. I think Václav Havel, he does mention a couple of times in writings, in his memoirs, that he always wanted to put it one day together, but he never really managed. When he had one talk with Jan Patočka, I had one talk only during the tragic events after, which Jan Wondershall was questioned to the point of dying very shortly after the interrogation. They managed to meet. Havel and Patočka met before the interrogation police hall, and they were waiting very patiently for their turn. And what did they speak about other than philosophy? And this was the only time that Havel had a chance to talk with Patočka. And when Havel recalls it, you can find it on YouTube till today. He said that they very quickly agreed that it could be extremely useful to write the history of responsibility, which then Havel says would be something like the history of the spirit. Which then alerted me because I have, as an economist, I have focused on the animal spirits. This is topic, don't you? It's a huge topic in economics. And even outside of economics, did you know anything about economic mythology and animal spirits? Something that we blame where we don't understand what's happening, then we just say blah 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 animal spirits that we do well, and then people leave us alone for yeah, animal spirits don't you understand that we can't understand. Oh yeah, well like the animals. So most of my colleagues read animal spirits as a nuisance, a disturbance on the otherwise flat and easily mathematizable matrix of the real world of economics. Speaking at Chicago School, this is very much the reading that a library of books on law, but on animal spirits has been written, focusing on the animal part. Unpredictable, disturbing, unhuman. It's a little bit also sometimes likened to the bull in your daybreak city of New York. It's atmospheric. You can't really settle it. It's a crazy world out there, and the graphs go up and down, and none of our econometric models are really able to, blah, 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 which is the wrong reading. Because it has nothing to do with the word animal. It's anima, as in animated. Something is a spirit that animates it. So when we go to summer holidays and you're too lazy to move, you purchase yourself an animator. It's usually a young little boy who makes you move. Doesn't let you rest on your bench. What's extra? So this animal spirit is basically a spirit, animal or not, green or blue. I don't care the important one. The important word is there that we are moved by spirit. And Adam Smith, so Joe Maynard Keynes, when he talks about the spirit, he says that if the spirits are dinged, the economy will fade and die. It's not an optional component that disturbs the otherwise flawless functioning of the economic matrix. It's the very essence that makes you think. Even taking, that makes you think. I have to finish my sentences. I am too eager to start the next sentence. So, to answer, for example, why are you here right now, right here? Did you come here with an expectation that this will increase the expected average wage that you're gonna get this year? Is that the calculation that you've been chose to sacrifice under opportunity costs? Why are you here? You can ask this 24/7. And my answer that you, just like me, are hoping to find some clarity, some meaning, some guidance in random. Well, this is all the reason why we go to concerts, I suppose. We're standing there, we are being waved past by light and music in a rhythmical fashion, and we kind of hope to hear the voice from the other side, so to speak, with June, Lisal Al-Qaid. We hope that that concert will somehow break the barrier between the real world and the shadow world, and somehow through music, I will for a little bit feel as if something is speaking to me. We also say it in Czech, we also say it in German, I will say it in English. You come and say, oh, this doesn't speak to me. It doesn't say anything to me. How will you say that in proper English? That doesn't say anything to us.
Say
Sag mir nichts.
Let's throw it in English.
All right, okay, but something doesn't speak to me. It's absurd. That's painting. It doesn't have a mouth. It cannot speak. Your expectation, lower your expectation, then you might start liking it. It's not there to speak to you, but it is in some way. So what I now try to establish is that this idea of the spirit as at the kernel of economics. Let me demonstrate it with Steve Jobs, for example. We live in a society, and Havel very often criticizes this as well as a part of the philosophy, that we believe that reason and faith kind of compensates each other. In other words, things that we know we don't have to believe, where we don't know much, we have to believe a lot. This is, of course, one way out you can look at it, but it's not going to lead you very well, not very far. It's much more useful, I would suggest, to look at faith as a superpower of reason. You know so much so that you can believe. So Steve Jobs saw the same Excel sheets like everybody else. He saw the same numbers like you and all thousands of men and women around him. But he saw something that everybody else saw in his numbers. He believed the iPhone into existence from sheer nothing. He believed, he knew so much, so he believed. It's a superpower. You first and foremost have to believe in your project to do it. The Excel sheet doesn't do that enthusiasm. The animal spirit is not brought by Excel sheets. And this is something that comes from the most quoted economist, really, John Maynard Keynes. I mean, Milton Friedman was not quoted as much as Keynes, for one reason or another. Havel starts where John Maynard Keynes ends. He really only gives this one sentence to the animal spirit. He said, "This is the most important thing in economics. If it should falter and die, all businesses will come to a halt." And then he doesn't bother explaining what he means by animal spirit, which is like super big too. Now I discovered thing that makes the whole economy tick, but that's all I'm gonna say about it. Personally, I think his wife called him for dinner, and he just said to finish a chapter. So if you put a word like animal spirits that nobody really knows what it means, it's chapter closed. Nobody's gonna ask about this. Well, oops. So, of course, it's very unlikely that Havel knew about Keynes in the 1950s or 70s. But he, and you can read this beautifully yourself in the letter to Rousseau. On page 7, he starts analyzing the spirit of the nation. What is the state? So he says, everything functions, but the spirit is dead. You have achieved stability at the cost of killing the spirit. And how did you kill the spirit? By banning few irrelevant newspapers about the history of art and I don't know, medieval Kuala Lumpur. And this is how the whole nation then more gets horrified. Let me then also, without me going into it, there is a beautiful recipe how to awaken your spirit, how to awaken the spirit of a nation, how to actually rest assured that this spirit can be deadened, but it can never be killed. So he never speaks about dead spirit. He only talks about deadening as a process that can never be successful. And towards the end of this letter to Rousseau, he says, I really wonder how you educated communists could have skipped such a basic function of a human society, that if you take away hope or spirit or this irrational positive expectation, this joie sans vivre, this sticking from your life, that this will collapse upon itself. And this is in fact happening to you. The system of control becomes too rigid for the little spirit that you have. And he basically predicted the collapse, economic collapse. He said this one thing is that if you start collapsing of spirit, with it up to decades, you will collapse of the economy. And this is a prediction that we economists usually get wrong. We are not good at predicting future. Also, for the social sciences, you have noticed that the only ones who went with future is us. You don't have sociologists saying, racism will end in Czech Republic on 13th of May 2032. You don't have political scientists saying that democracy will morph into such and such shape in 10 years. But economists are future happy any minute. 2 years from now, GDP, unemployment, inflation rate, this and that. but we are usually wrong with our predictions, and we are unable to predict the really important events, which Havel actually managed to. 20 years before the collapse of the system, he said, sooner or later, spiritless thing will come to a halt. If it's an economy, if it's ideology, doesn't really matter. Now, let me turn from politics and economic of Václav Havel, let me turn briefly to his, what I would say with Aloysius Tucker, who is a Harvard philosopher that wrote a fantastic book about Patočka and Havel. When I read this book, he said that Václav Havel actually, quite surprisingly, wrote a whole consistent philosophy, which is almost complete and consistent. So these Lisboas that we know are just small little fractions. So a beautiful cathedral that I will try to introduce in brief, that Václav Havel tried to put together with Patočka, but never managed. So this is sort of my attempt, which also very often happens in the history of economics, but also in philosophy, that the true gem is made from the teaching of the master by next or generation or two of his followers who actually did it. Assistant John Mayer Case mentioned his name. That's exactly what happened to him. He didn't write a systemic saying goes for Friedman. They come up with great ideas, but then they need a legion of systematic students who actually turn it into something rather operational. So let me start introducing this philosophy of Václav Havel in a nutshell. So Václav Havel starts, this first step is a quite a remarkable step. The beginning of wisdom, as you know from your old Bible, and with the Greeks, it was awe, childish awe. The beginning of philosophy is childish awe. For the Hebrews, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. For Havel, the beginning of wisdom is meaningless absurdity. Now, absurdity is a big topic. Somewhere you compare beautifully Kafka, Kundera, Sartre, you perhaps Kierkegaard and others, how they work with absurdity. But basically, for all of the wrench who absurdity is the dead. It's like, this is the final step, stabilization. Sorry, you're on your own. It's absurd. You live in an absurd world. How doesn't do this? He takes absurdity as the beginning of his journey, and he makes quite the three remarkable steps. One of them is, if we are able to perceive absurdity as absurd, then that must mean that leading exists. It's quite a simple movement, but I'm not aware of anybody else making such an interesting claim. If we are able to perceive absurdity, then world must have meaning, because in a meaningless world, there would not be such a thing as absurdity, because everything would be by default absurd. So that's his first step. He does almost even verbatim the same process that René Descartes does. Let's get rid of all the ideology. Let me think that everything is a dream. What is real? Cogito ergo sum. I am. Something is dreaming. Something is doubting. Something exists. Even if I'm hallucinating this, something is hallucinating this. I am some sort of conscious being that is able to critically look at my own thought and say that it exists. So Havel starts with this. So this is how Descartes starts, and you know that this small little reframing of philosophy has led to all the scientific advances that we're now enjoying. It started with René Descartes, needless to say, here with this particular thought that he found a firm place in the Archimedean world. Give me one firm fixed point and I can turn the universe upside down. For Descartes, the solid point was, I exist. Cogito ergo sum. It doesn't really, you can even hear it. It's not a very good translation, the one that we get. I doubt, or I am, or I think, therefore I exist. No, it's I'm cognitive. Cogito ergo sum. I am cognitive. It's actually a tautology if you go a little bit further with that, because it basically says, I exist, therefore I exist. I am conscious, therefore I'm conscious. Still true, but there's a little bit of tautology. So Havel starts with, okay, there is meaning. We now know, we have found the Archimedean point. Meaning must exist. There's no way out of it. this universe must be meaningful because we perceive absurdity. All right, now the question number 2 is, what is this meaning? So somebody likes coffee, somebody has the meaning of it, like directing these, in my opinion, not nice paintings. Somebody likes eating, somebody likes, I don't know, how do we draw and generalize meaning? And he doesn't make it easy for himself. He said, I want to find a meaning that will make sense to any sentient being, even though they are bodiless, they may come from Alpha Centauri, or they may be angels. I need to find something that would be meaningful to any conscious being. So what is making yourself more beautiful or longer, or having what it is meaningful for any thinking entity. Havel says, well, and this word is interesting, second original step in this first meaning exists. What shape or form does this meaning have? And Havel says, well, an identity. A equals A, a simple mathematical self-identity. A equals A, 1 equals what? Equals. Plus equals plus. It's a basic necessary component of defining an entity, that it is self-identity. 1 must equal 1. If 1 doesn't equal 1, then we're in trouble. Just imagine what would happen to all this beautiful theory of mathematics, which we today have so advanced that it fits no textbook no more. But if we, for example, here would discover that 1 doesn't really equal 1, the whole cathedral, this beautiful power that comes from mathematics, would crumble down in a second. The whole cathedral will be laid waste. If 1 not always equals 1. So then Laba, because he's not a mathematician, but a phenomenologist philosopher, he says, well, how is it then possible that you are not you? And if you fail to be you, if the equals between you and you doesn't really equal, how can you build anything on that? And it's a really easy, and this would make sense to any sentient being in the known and imaginable universe, that 1 equals 1, that I am I. Black is black and white is white. How is it possible that we human beings, unlike any other entity known to us, are doubting whether we are doing rightfully what we're like? You don't see cows going, am I cowy enough? You don't see stones having the questions that they're not stoned enough, although I don't mean it in that nice way. I mean it like in the Old Testament kind of a way. We are the only beings that are not enough of ourselves. So this is something, maybe it's just spirit moving it. It's also, yeah, okay, so, this is the meaning of morality, is that you must keep your identity. I like to use this mathematical detour where identity gets another meaning. A equals A is a identity, and it also is a word that we use in morality, that you should have your identity. Never was really quite clear to me what it means to have my identity, like Consulate, but I do know what it is to feel oneself, or not to feel oneself at all. We have a beautiful example of that from the New Testament prodigal son, which I kind of read as a continuation of the story of Garden of Eden, if you allow me. This is the point where you can throw things at me. Let me just really quickly go through this very famous parable that I'm quite sure all Americans will know by heart and all Czechs never heard about. I come from the most atheistic nation in the world. So, and that's, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. Havel really took the most difficult land to start with in his philosophy of hope or meaning. Václav Havel's philosophy, if you were to ask me how should I label it, I would call it philosophy of meaning. Unlike most philosophers today, he not only believed, but actually created a logical step to the fact that meaning must exist, that universe is meaningful. Universe is full of meaning. Your life has meaning. It's not an accident. This is a bold claim that philosophers don't like to make. So, 1 equals 1, you must be you, prodigal son. So the story of the prodigal son is a little bit like Eden, and they could spice it up a little bit for you. So we have the same scenario. There's a garden, and there are not one person, but 2 people. And one person, the other brother, decides to leave the paradise, and the older brother decides to stay. So this, to me, is kind of a answering of a question, hypothetical question. What could happen if Adam and Eve would not have consumed the fruit of Good and evil, but in fact, if they would stay in the garden, would it be, is this what divinity wanted? As is the common reading? Most in every church, religious, they do free tried something that word. The prodigal son forfeits all his wealth with drinks and prostitution and whatnot, and then he is not even allowed to eat the very food that he feeds to the pigs. And then we read a very, very interesting sentence, which always kind of illuminates me annoyance ever since I was a young Christian at the end of age of 17. What exactly comes to what? How can I come to an I? What happened? Which I walked away with from which I? I mean, how did these two eyes, in fact, become different? And which I came to what I? What does it say when we say that he came to himself? He came to himself, he became himself, I become I, and he then came back to the father, and his older brother was angry. So the question is whether his older brother was himself. And from the context of the story, you will very clearly see that he was never himself. He could not rejoice in the fact that his brother survived. That's understandable. What's less understandable is that he couldn't rejoice in the joys of his father, whose son survived against the odds. And then he said that, why are we now celebrating this brothel man who squandered all your possession? I was here serving you. I never really even had a party for my friends. All huge signals. I was never myself. I was trying to do you, but I never had this experience that the young prodigal son had, that he actually. And as a consequence, one has to ask, why does it have to be such an economic crisis where that person was almost dying out of hunger, not because of spiritual epiphany? That person had nothing to eat. What is the distance? What is the gap between I and I that it requires such an existential economic crisis of these two to merge? I sometimes imagine CERN, how they, accelerate some atomic particles so that they merge into each other. That's how much energy it requires for I to become I. And now how about us? Okay, so what does it mean that I is I? What is your basic moral task in life? And moral, I don't know how it is understood here in the United States. In Czech Republic or perhaps in the continent of Europe, morality is often read as a sort of a braving mechanism of your life, something that you shouldn't do. Havel repositions this. He said morality is the engine of your life. The no's are a derivative. So the reason why you can't kiss any girl that you meet on the street is because you only want to kiss that one wife. That negative comes from the positive drive. Morality is something that spiritually possesses you and drives you. So you can read a human being. That's how I like to read it. Human being is an animal possessed by spirit. We are possessed by a being. We are a weird animal. We do weird things. For example, we dress. This is also already weird. Now, when this room is warm enough for all of us to sit here naked. But we don't do that because we feel very unnatural if we would be here in our true nature. We feel more ourselves when we are at somebody else's. This is Park Avenue. So I feel more myself when he's like, I'm like, this is my escape. So how to be yourself? What is this I? And how about response? And here is when the word responsibility, otherwise, again, a word that is kind of hidden under meaning that we've kind of lost. He says responsibility is that your soul responds to your spirit. That you are in constant critical dialogue between something that is you, your soul, and something that's a little bit you, but also a little bit outside, such as meanings usually are outside of the given entity to which they give meaning. What does this mean? Is it your spirit or is it a general spirit? I really don't know, but the first commandment says, love your God. And again, you could be an economist there and say, why waste the word your? Why did we be enough just love God? We all know which one we're talking about. Why does it say love your God? Is your God different from your God? But it's also It's the same God, but it's yours. So Havel says, in order for you to be what equals one, your spirit must be in constant communication with your soul. And the voice of your spirit is negative. It's critical. This is where he comes back to daimonion from Socrates. And you know this story very well. Socrates was sentenced to death in Athens, and he was given the leeway to run away. And his students came to him and said, "So run. This is how we settle it like gentlemen, nobody gets hurt." And he said, "No, I'm not going to run." And the student asked, "Why?" He said, "Well, I'm not, I'm not very beautiful in body because I'm ugly and short and bold, and I don't know what were the characteristics of ugliness back then. Today it's getting fashion. So I'm not good. I'm not strong in the body. I'm not an athlete. I'm not beautiful. I'm not also strong in my soul, in my mind. I'm not cleverer than anybody else. Those things I know that I don't know anything, a little bit of a misquote, but there you get the hinge that he for sure wasn't trying to be the smart ass. But he said, there's one thing that has been always unique about me, and that is that I listen to this voice. I don't know if other people had it as well, but I do. And I always reverse to the subject. That is my only thing that I've always done. And fun fact, this voice only speaks to me in negative. It doesn't tell me what to do, it just tells me what not to do. And now it says not to rub. So, I mean, I ain't gonna, just because the spirit says so, that's what I'm gonna stick to. So here we come to the difference between the spirit and the soul. And I really know it's a fascinating study, but the future of nations is not forged by the soul properties, but by the spirit property. You can have uneducated child who opens the eyes for the whole country, such as the story of the 6 emperors who close. The educated people, the soul, whose intellect and structures were very advanced, were exactly where the people who would never see that the emperor is naked. They saw a fantastic dress. It had to be a small child, uneducated, who said that the emperor is naked. There's a second joke in that emperor story is not only is the emperor naked, which we can now all see because we have been our eyes opened by this small little honest child. There is a joke in that story because for us Europeans, unlike for you Americans, not only is the emperor's new clothes missing in the story, the emperor is missing. There is no emperor. We've been misled by the story. Look at the decoy. Who is the emperor? Who's the ruler? Who's the king of Europe? 75 long, not very boring years. So we don't have a leader. Here you know what's his name. Who's the leader in China? We know. Who's the leader of Russia? We know. Who's the leader of Europe? Imagine how your faculty would look like without a boss. Imagine how your restaurant or how Roman Empire would look a few years without Caesar, without a spirit. And Havel says this is the leadership of the world. He takes Hegelian and Weltgeist and he democratizes. You know that one of the main critiques of Hegelianism, the last philosopher who was actually trying to put the system together, I claim that Havel is one more after him who will actually try to put the system so it makes sense, because enlightenment led to a fantastic conclusion that the knowledge of man is wider than any brain could take, even though it's the brain of our Einstein. There's no way that all the information from all fields could fit into there. So what we do is we split. You do this, you do that, you do nail polishes, you do the dollars between, southern Bohemia and northern Chicago, and we specialize. The third step of enlightenment was specialization, and we got far, very, very, very far, to the point that we understand details about matter that are unimaginably obscure. But the second step, which I always thought was okay, and then one day when we know kind of enough, we put it together and we try to kind of stitch it together to see how this all sits together, because it can't be that we will be able to find a language between us and it exactly happened. A lot of people are hoping that AI will consolidate sciences. I don't think so, but that's another debate. What could consolidate the sciences is this spirit of critique. And let me now conclude. So this is basically the philosophy of Václav Havel. Meaning exists. That meaning is a basic identity of entity equals entity, A equals A. when pushed, what is this? It is a critical open ear of my soul towards the critical voice of my spirit. And fourthly, this is the conclusion of what I wanted to say, because I want to take as much time as I can for what it did to you. Whether it said well, whether it told you something, or whether it told you nothing. The fourth step is what is connecting the universe, United States of America, Europe, plants, sunshine, gravity. What are the basic forces in the universe that are working from the beginning till now? Again, small little nuances of an economist. When the universe was born, and this is true in almost all mythologies, it was born for. So if we take the scientific Big Bang narrative, which is my favorite, personal, the universe was basically made of hydrogen atoms. For the first hundreds of millions of years, the universe was dark and poor. There was nothing else except for hydrogen atoms, a little bit of helium, and a trace amount of lithium. Helium, lithium, and of course, hydrogen are the lightest, poorest atoms. Hydrogen only has one electron, one proton, doesn't even have a neutron, by the way. And then it was like the proletariat of the world ununited. The world was full of poor hydrogen atoms that had no trace roots. And the universe was dark. Not even stars existed. Nothing existed. It was a very trivial, thus poor universe. And as the universe evolved, as if some unseen forces in the shape of, let's say, the four basic rules of physics happened to shape suns and ignite the thermonuclear reaction, and then stars produced the protoplanetary accretion disk, etc., 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 etc. In other words, we don't have time for this, but I deconstructed the GDP from which that the universe is getting richer and richer and richer. I mean, just look how many colors you have in this room. At least 30. And that itself is already wealth. What I am saying together with Havel is that there is that the growth of riches is not a feature exclusive to capitalism. The growth of riches is not a feature specific to the economy. It's not even a feature exclusive to life. Spontaneous growth of riches is a feature of the universe. It has been happening for 14 billion years. And something of cosmic proportions, Havel says, would have to happen in order for this growth trend to suddenly stop and reverse. So let me conclude with the final step: how to live a light and how to democratize the Hegelian Weltgeist, because Hegelian Weltgeist believe that the world is led by, let me put it this way, that Weltgeist uses great leaders such as Napoleon. This was the pain of Martin Heidegger, because he believed that Hitler is the representation of the spirit, because he was so powerful, and Hitler did bias a certain evil spirit in Germany. And how do we comply? Well, he said that you don't have to be Napoleon or a leader, that in fact history is not forged by the Weltgeist, but that Weltgeist is democratized into the internal, let's say, infrastructure of every greengrocer. Every greengrocer put a big Havel just by displaying or not displaying the meaningless all proletariat system, as you know very well, powers. In Christianity, when we hear the voice of the Holy Spirit, also notice that you would say Holy Soul, that means something altogether different. Holy Spirit is something that comes and goes, it possesses you. We actually know it from horror movies. Their evil spirits possess us. And they make us do things that we otherwise wouldn't do. There's not a single movie where a positive ghost actually possesses us, which is the way that I view human history, that we start evil people possessed by a good spirit, and it's making us do things like cathedral and education, even though we don't see the point of it. Somehow we love it. In Christianity, when we hear the voice, the response is a voice back, praise back. Most beautifully, this you can see in the so-called speaking in tongues, where the Spirit prays directly to the Spirit, bypassing our rational minds, which of course begs the question, why doesn't the Spirit speak to the Spirit itself? Why does it need our vocal cords somehow? Well, but this is the way I like it, that we just hop up speaking foreign languages, which is classical Christianity. Voice, and what we should respond is a praise of some sort of a Havel has it differently. We hear the voice. You can do actually a nice bit like society. People feel, what is it today? Wednesday? Try this with me. Let's see how the voice of the Spirit sounds like. And don't worry, nothing spooky about it. Say inside of you. In Czech, we say in spirit. That works in English. Say in your spirit. By heart, we say, I memorize only by heart. Say today is Wednesday. Good. Okay. Now, can you say that with your voice? Just be yourself. Today is Wednesday. Is it the same word? There you go. So what is this voice inside you? You can hear that it's different from your voice. You look all shocked. This is exactly what happens with me when I talk about it. Very part of the This sounds like my voice. I thought it's my voice, but when I actually pronounce the same sentence, it's a different voice. Is it the voice of my father? First, let me ask, is it the same gender? Anybody has a different gender, a female that hears a male voice, or vice versa? No. Okay, so this research of mine that I've conducted with 2,000 people, always the same result. Everybody goes, oh, yeah, I was in the questions, which voice is it then? Is it Sean Connery? Is it Brad Pitt? I don't, it's an interesting thing when you're bored in the car and you can just listen to it. Havel is the voice of the Spirit speaks to us, and our response is action. This is how history is forged in Havel. There is not one God, guys, that in totalitarian fashion shapes you to form, because that's the way things are supposed to be, and that's it. But it speaks not so differently from the Christian image of Holy Spirit. It speaks in your internals and your responses and action in the real world of matter. This is how history democratically evolves, and every small little program goes through with the effect of the butterfly effect, creates further unforeseen consequences, which is one of the few arguments, one of the strongest arguments about utilitarianism. You cannot judge deeds by how they end up, because you never know how they end up. You can judge deeds only by their meaningfulness. This is the famous quote with which I will leave you. We should hope is different from optimism. Hope is to believe that certain things have meaning and it's important to them, even though they end up poorly. It doesn't matter how they end up, because you are not in control of how things end up. You're only in control of being able, both inside and in the body politics, to love your enemies, to love the critical voice of your opposition. This is, by the way, this love your enemies 2,000-year-old thing we all heard that in the church never made much sense to me, because it just seemed a little bit over the top. It's in fact the most absurd form of goodness that I have found anywhere in any ideology. There's, we call this total happiness for all beings. That's pretty good, but to be asked to be kind to your enemies, somebody who wishes you evil, to wish that well, that's a tall order. And then in fact, I claim that it's the tallest order in the history of ethics. But if you come up with something else, please do let me know. So we thought that this is a moral pitch, maybe good for Sunday greetings and seducing girls on spring evenings, but we have discovered after 2,000 years of trying to follow the really bad issue that it's not a moral thing. It's a life path for a happy and rich and peaceful and prosperous society. What do I mean? Well, to love your enemy doesn't say that you're not supposed to have enemies. This is actually quite important. Jesus doesn't say don't have enemies. In fact, in order to comply with this love your enemy thing, I first of all have to start with enemies in order to love them. I need to have enemies to comply with this biggest moral maxim in the history of mankind. So it doesn't say act in a way that nobody's your enemy and we can all sing a kumbaya around the campfire and we know be happy and peaceful and harmonious. In fact, he says, as if there are other passages in the Bible that will click, other hard to understand passages of the Bible. Make enemies, have enemies, but love them. What does this remind you of? Well, how about sports? Sports. You have an enemy, fencing enemy, boxing enemy, tennis enemy. You're my opposition. You're my Satan. You are trying. I always never understood with football. To me, it's just a coordination failure. Why didn't they just book different times? Well, why do they put the teams on the same moment when there are other teams trying to prevent? It just doesn't make sense to me. The boxing laws are a sign of love because I want to fight you. I want to have a good fight, but I don't want to hurt you. I love you. But 100%, but 20%, 5% of love is enough. So it's the principle of sports that we create enemies that should not try to hurt each other, but love each other, even though they're competing for the same thing. Isn't this the kernel of market competition? In order to have market competition, you must have, competitors for starters. Everybody wants to be a monopolist, but we don't freely. You have somebody who you have as a competitor, but you don't wish them death. And the same goes in body politics. If you're not happy with the person who's ruling it now, well, you've been supporting it with tax money for many, many years. Same goes Czech Republic. We've been feeding the opposition with one task, and that is to criticize everything imaginable and really powerful. That is, to me, that's the telltale sign of a good democracy, not how elections go and whether they're free or not, because we have enough of those. In Czech Republic, we also had free elections. Czechoslovakia, we had free elections. In Russia, they had free elections. Nobody's doubting that. Then Zakaria came with a better definition of democracy, that is the functioning of the court. Also good, but not as good as a functional democracy that is lost in centuries. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, our European spirit, that we love to hate each other, love to criticize each other. And let me end with a joke that is slightly Havelian. In European Parliament, we have 22% of part of deputies who are against the European Union. Pretty normal, huh? Imagine how your Congress would look like if 22% of your deputies would be against the United States of America, and they would be like bother law for confederation. That is absurd. If you want the joke to continue, think of an opposition in Duma, in the Russian parliament. And if you want the joke to be even better, China. My last question is, why was Greta Horn in Sweden? Why wasn't Greta born being, I don't know, Russia or Beijing, where the air is actually dirty? Why was she born in Sweden, where the air is pristine? Well, probably, most likely, she was born in Beijing. Most probably, she was born in some, let's say, Arabic country or Russia or traditional country. But she was silenced one way or another. Whereas in Europe, we all bow down and we listen to an uneducated child who's about to insult. The moment she started her public mission, technically speaking, was the definition of basic education. And yet, because she had a spirit, we listened to her basically because she was criticized. This, I view, is the only workable solution that I propose for the future of this planet. Either America wins and becomes great again, or Russia wins, or China wins with the power of the powerful. And we will be hoping that there will be some sort of balance of power, or that the one who wins will be a benign dictator, but there is no such a thing as benign dictator. There is also no such a thing as illuminated or illuminated autocrat. How do you call it? Not illuminated. And enlightened, because it doesn't exist. It's like an unstable particle. What good an enlightened dictator do the second day? Introduce democracy. There's no such thing. So the only hope for the world, that is to really the last thought, is that we learn what Europe has learned among nations in the most bloody continent that this earth has provided. We have learned to love each other a little bit between the French and the Germans. We don't overtake each other. We wish each other well. When 3 GDP is growing, we're all generally happy for that. years ago, we would reach out. And this, in fact, is the only institutional Salvator Mundi that we have invented in the history of mankind. A benign empire that doesn't want to be enlarged. When a new country wants to become a member country of European Union, US says that. Compare this with the behavior of superpowers in the past. I mean, we basically raped the countries. Next cause, we introduce our currency. Here, if somebody wants to take a euro currency, we go like very meticulous Europe, very meticulous economic judgment that Europe is the most economic currency that ever existed. People who are blaming that's the political currencies. Yet every currency except for crypto is political currency. And euro happens to be the most economic as well, because there are only economic requirements in order to adopt it. And this has never happened in the history of conquest. Anyway, so I think the task of Europe now is to reform ourselves in a way that Canada would like to join, in a way that South Korea would like to join, in a way that Japan, Israel, Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, China will one day want to join. Is this naive? Yeah. Less naive than believing that Czechoslovakia would be a member of, or Bulgaria, member of the European 1988. And so this is my nutshell philosophy, original, understanding, I hope, and pretty consistent and interesting and original meaning, philosophy based on meaning, which is on a theoretical level worked out all the way to the personal nitty-gritty details, also testified by Václav Havel's slide itself, because to how many philosophers did it actually happen that they could or had to apply their philosophies not only on their own lives, which is already rare, but on the life of the whole country, becoming a president of 13 years, and it wasn't a boring period either. European Union, NATO, Czechoslovakia falling apart, and he did it, even though he was not educated, because his spirit was always asking himself, am I seeking for truth and love, which I suggest is the most reasonable candidate for the meaning of life, universe, and everything. Of course, I say a little bit with a tongue in cheek, because the meaning of the universe, everything, life and everything is, of course, 42, which I used to say all the way until I was young, and now that I've matured, I no longer give these trickster-worthy answers, but I say to young people, without wanting to torture them, that I have a very good candidate for the meaning of life, universe, and everything, and that is truth and love. And the fact that truth and love will prevail over hatred and lies is not a wishful thinking or a prayer or mantra that we should repeat, and the more we repeat it, the more mightily it will come to truth. It is a physical fact. Truth will always win over lies, because lie is a non-existent state of matter. If I say this is a chair, no universe does this exist. Truth, even orcs in Mordor, if they started science to build a catapult, they would require truth. What good would it be if you get false results on the trajectory of ballistic stones? Also, the demons in hell, when they want to report from their subordinates, they want to hear the truth. You can only use a lie against your enemies. Lie is useless. Lie has no power at all. There is nothing behind the statement, this is an elephant. Truth will always be stronger than lie. Through those lies and most strength, they can be used as spokes and mirrors, and develop of as a way of reading gravity. Love and truth as a Chartian way of reading the history of the universe, where you get a continuous following from the Big Bang all the way to what's happening in current events these days. Is it still love and truth fighting hatred and lies? And it's a vocabulary that can be translated to every small child. So I would like to, fourth time, conclude that I would like to be in a position in Czech Republic where I could suggest that part of our constitution, which I love, I think it's the most beautiful poem ever written, is our constitution. Yours is also on some it's basically about truth and love, our constitution, but it never says so openly. It's an implicit kind of theme. I would like to be in a position what I would suggest to actually put truth and love into our constitution in forms such as the president swears that he will guide the country in truth and love. something like this, or senators. This is something that would then, these two words would be there. And maybe in time, Finland would join, and then France, and maybe United States, or we would then form a union of truth and love, which would be European, but not democratic. I mean, not bureaucratic. And it would be a legion of countries that swear on belief and the importance of truth and love. The test that it's not a tautology is that Russia will not put truth and love under their flag. China will not put truth and love. I'm not even sure if Trump would put truth and love there. That judgment I leave to you. You are more skilled in this thing. But Europe, Canada would be a footing entity, which would, instead of unity, and this unity would system, which is nice, but not deep enough. I could write a page or two about it, and then I would run out of subjects. Instead of unity and disunity, why don't we start thinking about ourselves as an economy that believes that empirically cooperative behavior is what got us away from the egoism of animals and nature? Thank you very much. You don't
Okay. Question, but I don't think so far. Oh, that's it. It sounds. I don't have any online right now, but Peter doesn't know where it's open. Yeah, it's great. Any questions?
answers?
Yeah. Okay.
I'm good. If we're going to start talking about this movement, but that's clearly more about the way that philosophy, the development of philosophy, a little bit like
Yeah, so that's a perfect question. So Havel goes through, let's say, three basic periods of his life. One is a dissident, second is a revolutionary, and third is a president. You could not pick a more varied. And he asked himself a question: can I find a compass, a star, a morality, an engine that could drive me safely through all these three absolutely different? So as a dissident, he immense this theoretical framework from the prison where he's deprived most of his freedom and he's in the most absurd situation there. He develops this philosophy based on meaning. And let's just for simplicity say that the guiding star is truth and love and listening to his spirit, and when spirit says no, he's not gonna do it. Let's say that's actually a moral toolbox that is understandable. So he applies this during the dissident times, and he was actually really a good manager too, because those dissidents were not very much of a everybody was very, very, very strong personality, and yet he managed to somehow steer it without huge internal fights. Then revolution, where he became a general that actually got from prison to the castle within 3 days without a single shot fired. So it doesn't appear much like a general, but yeah, he does qualify. It just didn't shoot anyone while he was generalizing his approach to the castle. But he succeeded, especially puppets. And the third period is with 13 years, he is the president of this always a very disturbed period of a country. And towards the end of his career, one journalist asks him, Vijal, thank you, whether he has changed his life philosophy. And he said, this is a bit of a question, because I had the opportunity to test my very abstract and naive and slightly idealistic and quite original philosophy with the disturbances of real life events. I can now tell you that I absolutely don't take it back. It is, I can tell you now more than I could 30 years ago. This is more so for me, and I didn't like that it was when I was younger, only having an experience of freshly crafting it from thin air. It's interesting. So this practicality of Václav Havel's life philosophy is something very much needed in today's chaotic world where all values are questioned. He even goes as far as to say that I can actually compare values, which is again somewhere where no philosopher would go. He would even maybe say I'm a kind of to compare cultures, which is a good job. And he says the way I can do it is by the horizon. So let's say you get drunk. Well, let's say somebody gets drunk And is it meaningful? Yeah, that's why this person done it. He meets somebody interesting and he has a fun night. But the meaning of that drug list is over the next morning. It is a special purpose capsule enclosed meaning, which has a horizon of 1 day. Whereas your family has some horizon of 7 days, 6 days. So I can compare meanings by their horizon. Now let's do something brave. Let's try and compare the meaning of the United States of America with the so-called meaning of Europe. The meaning, again, that I'm going to do some arrogance here by turning such a subject into a few sentences, but one has to do this. Let's make America great again. It actually great slogan. I know it doesn't appeal to most of you. There's a story, it has a beginning, there's still, turn up events. There's a direction. But it made sense only to Americans. What do the Australians care about whether America's great again or Europeans? It has a horizon in, let's say, 50% of the American population, or let's even say American population. Even Democrats who hate Trump, making life great again in America is something that is appealing. It's really well chosen again. And what is the narrative of Europe? There is not one. This is why I think that our leaders who are proposing the kind of democracy that is called liberal democracy, I don't like the word. I think we should be called Havelian democracy. I don't know what's liberal anymore. Liberal in Europe means exactly what as that mean in the United States, and it's confusing. The liberals used to be right wing, now they're right wing. I mean, please, somebody explain really. I'm just a social, and I've studied this for food. So, if Europe says the meaning of Europe is to become a role model of friendly behavior between countries, loving your enemies, such as France now loves the enemy of Germany, the animosity of Germany. If this is the meaning of Europe, then it's a meaning that is sort of more old world. If we could only learn to apply, and if it works in Europe, it's going to work anywhere. The bloodiest, if we don't comply, then there is no chance for the world. But for 75 years, one way or another, we somehow did it. So now we Europeans could say, okay, our meaning is this. Let's try to follow the European institutional path into prosperity and freedom. And that is something that is meaningful. The horizon of such a sentence is planetary. The horizon of let's make America great again is only America. And also, by the way, sorry to say, I don't know how branches to name America for yourself. So maybe we'll come to it. And you somehow became the Americans. Then what would you be called if I would take the name America back and appropriate it back? It's a continental appropriation of the word American. So I had to admit this really quickly when a friend of mine came to me and I misjudged his accent. I said, "Oh, you're from America?" I said, "Oh, from Canada." And I knew I was in trouble, so I had to say it up really quick. I said, "Well, no, but Canada is America." Last time I checked. So how did the Americans? How did they? So you're basically you're United States. If I took Americans' way. So people of the United States, you were able to create a horizon of meaning. Let's make America great again. Which again, I envy you. It's quite a wonderful slogan. We Europeans should come up with let's make the world great for the first time. And that is something that Kearney was speaking about. I was really happy that this voice came up from Czech Republic or from Europe, but it came from America. That this is the way how countries should go forward. Not by national egoism, but by understanding that European example is maybe not in economics, but especially in international relations, it's an example I've ever had. Thanks for the research. Thank you. Of course, I apologize. The questions are usually great. The answers are probably.
Any other questions? Do we have any online? Yeah, I can ask a question. So I'm following and sympathetic with the analysis, but it is us just again. I guess one question that came to mind as you were speaking is someone who works with young people all day. And it's not only a problem of young people, but I think it's something that they're particularly dealing with, is this question of spirit, actually. I fear that one of our biggest challenges in the US is that we actually don't believe in spirit anymore, or don't even value spirit, don't want it in that way, that sense of Christ. And this is especially, I think, an issue that's inflected by AI, right? So What do you say to those who fear that we lack or had lost?
That's amazing. So first of all, what I try to propose here is a no dualistic system. It's a triads. Because the dualistic systems never really satisfied me nor philosophy they've come with. So I tried to play with body, soul, and spirit. Now suddenly you have a three-body problem. The trajectory there is mathematically unpredictable. And you are absolutely right. The third component is optional. Spirit is optional. You can also explain it without it. But you must say then that it doesn't have meaning. So everybody believes in the body. This is quite clear. Do you believe in the soul? Well, with language as a soul structure. It's something that's objectively real, but not tangible. Mathematics, law, money, the organizational structure of the faculty, organizational structure of the embassy or of your household. Math is a beautiful example. I always like to teach my friends that, it's the year 2026 and we still don't know how free looks like. We know how the symbol for free looks like, but that's not free. Because free doesn't look like anything. We know how free counts, 3 fingers look like, but that's not 3. And if that's hard to grasp, then it's easier to imagine that we don't know how pulse looks like. How does summing look like? How does the massing look like? How does division look like? It only exists in the symbol. So you have to believe in the soul. That is not optional. There are things that are objectively true, like the value of your software, which is also weightless, but they pay for it exact sum of money. So the body and soul is mandatory. We have to fill these 2 forms too. But the spirit is optional. So if you believe in the spirit, you also, and this is something that Havel works beautifully with, if you believe in the spirit, from that logically follows that lives are immortal and that everything is recorded in memory. He makes a very precise analytical conclusion. If you don't believe that there is a spirit of the universe, let's just say that the universe is random, then your life is just then don't look for light because it's a hallucination. It's a waste of your time. There is no meaning. In fact, what are you doing right here, right now, all this time? What have we been talking about? So if there is no meaning, it also is meaningless to talk about whether there's meaning is. But absolutely right. The spirit is optional. The spirit also doesn't have to be there. There are countries without spirit. There are companies without spirit. There are companies without meaning, and it functions. Havel speaks about this delight. So the Bible speaks about life and light of the spirit, and Havel talks about existential revolution. Havel's philosophy is very, very close to Christianity. It is not identical, because Havel doesn't use the Bible or Revelation or church authorities to prove his points. He usually is using sheer logic. But the conclusion is very similar. Also something that deals with truth and light, and that you have to believe in the spirit. There are certain things that work if you believe in them, but there are also certain things that only work if you believe in them. For example, money. Money only works if we all collectively believe in it, etc. So yeah, very good question. Spirit is optional.
Any other questions?
Could you say something about Havel's life, in general, over his life, literally with the ideas that truth, well, are extremely important? What would you say came to be for him the most important truths that he can focus on? Because through his experience, he would have enlarged his universe of possible truths over the course of his life. So you've read a lot of Havel. I know mostly his plays. We knew about his plays before we knew it was getting going. And they're impressive plays. But what would you say he would have said are the most important truths that he wanted to emphasize as truths, as a pursuit of truth?
So that's a very good question. I think when he got asked a question like this, a similar one, he would say that to him, living truth isn't really saying true things like this is brown and this is white and this is a microphone. That's a certain level of truth, which like we can call scientific truth. And then he talks about this poetic truth, which is basically the ability, living in truth is for him the ability to actively listen to the voice of his spirit. Living in an identity where I am open to the spirit. Your question about plays is a fundamental one, because he many times in his writings, he says, I wrote these plays to provoke the people to look for meaning, because the biggest actor on my stage is the viewer. So first and foremost, what does the viewer act? Well, he enacts that he's not there. This is your role when you come to a theater. You're acting like you're not there. You're not even supposed to talk. You're not supposed to, handy and up for sure. You're not supposed to intervene in the events of the stage. So when somebody's murdering somebody, and normally all reaction would be, I'm gonna help the lady. But we pretend it's when you go to theater, it's a guided meditation. It's an out-of-body experience. When the theater performance is good, you forget that you are a gentleman sitting in the middle of the first row, but you breathe and hope with Romeo that she won't kill herself, and you kind of, oh, don't do. And you know very well that it's, I don't know. You do know that it's not Romeo. It's Jon Snow or John, I don't know, Cavendish, who is saved Romeo. And that girl is not Julia. Her name is Anna Novacek. And just for this 1.5 hours. And also, it's not a poison that they're drinking. It's benign. The life isn't really a life. But you know this every single time you go to see a theater. And yet that you're touched, that you cry, and you hope that this would not end up the same way like Benedict last night. Well, every single time you watch Star Wars, it always ends the same way. That he is his father. It's got Chapek planned off. But we still kind of, where the meditation is good, when George Lucas does a good job with all the trickstery, we kind of buy it. So it's kind of an out-of-body experience in one way. In way, this was also a collective meditation. I just did to I allowed you to sit in your comfortable non-lotus seats, but it was a collective meditation. We'd been through the universe from the beginning all the way till the end, but in fact, in this room, nothing happened. It's just waving air. So Havel's, he also said the truth, it depends who says it and when. So the truth that Hitler was what was a despicable human being is a cheap truth today. In 1938, it was an expensive truth, but it was the same piece of information. Only one would cost your life, and the second one would only cost an applause. Everybody would agree with this today. And let me talk about the truth of the poets. Have you ever noticed? I don't know if it's maybe me and my wife. I tell her you are beautiful 97% to me, which is already a 13% compliment right there. Truth told, she was rather on my A. But I'm a nice guy, so I give her 13% included tip compliment. She never reacts well. I said 92% is like, that's statistically unreal with all the girls that I've ever seen, including the internet. 92 that's like really good. Don't try to make me lie that you are the most beautiful girl in the world. It's simply statistically unlikely. I probably haven't even seen the most beautiful girl. And she when I talk to her scientifically and precisely, she really doesn't appreciate that. However, when I come home and I say something absurd, like you look like a rising sun over the Sahara Desert, which she doesn't. No way, there's no similarity between a rising sun and the desert. And yeah, I get better breakfast after such obnoxiously, blatantly untrue and lie. Somehow we human beings communicate better in lies than in scientific. So no, let me rephrase that. There is poetic truth that is detached from facts, and yet it works. Yeah, let's say it this way. And then there is a scientific truth that doesn't work even if it's precise. So like a poetry, for example, to me, poetry has to be precise in order to be good, but not exact. Poem does not have to be exact, but it has to be precise. So if I may mimic an answer, this is the best I got. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Very well. Thanks. Good job.
Got time for any questions?
Yeah, but casual. I have one. If
Okay. All right.
So I would like to ask you,
What you want to ask? You want to ask the
some.
Either.
No. Sorry, people. I'll ask.
Yeah, so you talk a lot about how we're driven by the sort of morality and religion spirit, how this sort of comes together in this overarching sort of battle of your truth and love. But I found it very interesting that there's never really any definition of good that is seen somehow, and that maybe there's not like there's a subjective nature that every single individual has that in my eyes sort of leads to this sort of conflict, and maybe that conflict, comes out to, oh, we should love and respect one another, and that sort of conflict is absolved. But is there any sort of natural or inherent good that ever comes with that?
That's a beautiful question. Well, you just made me realize that Havel doesn't speak in categories of good and evil. Actually, you're really right. He speaks of truth and love, lies and hatred, much more. That's a beautiful, yeah. He's a little bit not outside of good and evil in the Nietzschean sense, but he uses different operational characteristics. What was the second part of your question?
I guess it was, yeah, sort of when we live in this spirit that we have, that will sort of, I think, lead everyone to sort of a different idea that will, I guess, that lead to conflict in one another, even as we go.
I am familiar. So what you're asking is actually really fundamental, and I'm only thinking about it for a week, so I don't know if my answer will be satisfactory. We're not here not to know conflicts. I would be, and this is something that I'm not sure with, but just throwing it out. I think I define love, technically, as a unnecessary complication of the system. When you fall in love, you are allowed to simplify your life. I don't know. Mustn't be over or it's a voluntary complication of a system. You'll be more peaceful than in my own. We all know this. There's one you pretend. But somehow we introduce a complete stranger into our lives, which for sure will complicate. So the love, you could even go as far as to define truth as a consistent system of symbols that is as wide as possible. And of course, the wider it gets, the more difficult it is for to remain truthful. I don't know, Gödel's sentences, being complete with spirit, basically said that mathematics is unable to construct a that mathematics is unable to construct a complete system which is not contradictory. It's either complete or contradictory, which kind of sucks because that to me is the beginning of postmodernism, truly, that even in mathematics you have to choose your methods in order to horse it by the course. That really very hypocrisy. She emphasizes this. So truth can be even we know how to strengthen our bodies. This is something that we do. We make exercise. We make unnecessary movements. For example, did you notice that push-ups are actually not useful? There is not a situation of your life where push-up will be useful. Maybe if it is an earthquake and you are right under your bed and your hands happen to be like this, it could be useful that you push yourself up. But otherwise, we do push-ups not because they're useful, but because the movement itself is useful. So let's say strength of a system of software or language or anything that's systematic is that the wider the system is, the more powerful it is. Let's say currencies. The dollar is a stronger currency than Czech crown because it's wider. It reaches further. It has more volume in it. English language is stronger language than Czech language because you can use it in many more places of the planet. The Lord of the Rings is stronger than Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood, the Shout story. Lord of the Rings is a very not contradictory, and then you can take Dune, that's even, let's say, more fertile and deeper or richer mythology. And now what is it? Why isn't truth enough? Maybe this is the question. This is the debate that I have with my son, who's a mathematician, and I say, hey, you can have this with your friends. If you could choose truth and love, it's kind of easy, but if you had to choose in one word, what is the basis of the universe? Is it rather truth or rather love? This is an interesting debate, one that Jesus had with Pharisees. Perhaps, yeah, Pharisees would say truth, Jesus would say love, forgiveness, stuff like that. So, if it would be only truth without love, things would never complicate itself. Math is growing not so much because of its usefulness. That's a secondary feature of mathematics. Math is growing because some people love math. And basically what mathematicians are doing since the Greek times is complicating things that didn't really have to be that complicated. You could have stayed with pluses and minuses. But you were bored and you fell in love with math, so now you're doing these people they love math. They don't like quite soft. They don't do it for practical. They despise practicality. So so the system, in order for it to grow, is propelled by law into artificial, unnecessary complication of the complicated math already. But if you continue this thought process, it would mean that conflict is the bias for law. With which I'm not easy, but I'm offering it to you as a reply to a very good question, an answer that is not so good, but at least I hope it will create a splinter as it has created Iceland. The point of the law is not irony, but exactly criticism and vicious bloodbath. As the law of Christianity. Thank you.
On that note, we invite you to continue the conversation over a light reception.